So let's take a look at some principles. You hear this word a lot, probably in the field, reinforcement. Okay, again, that was coined by Skinner. And anything that's reinforcing increases the likelihood of the behavior occurring again. Okay, so when a parent says that, well, she gives him extra TV time, he gets a treat, he gets to be taken next door, he gets additional playtime. Okay, those would be categorized as reinforcement. Okay, so it increases the likelihood of behavior reoccurring. Now, reinforcement can be positive or negative. Okay, and we say positive or negative, we can actually add something, like we give the child a treat, we give them a prize. However, we can also take away something that may be causing them distress. So to give you an idea of sort of where this came from, a lot of this came from research with animals. And I remember having to do this at school. We actually used rats. And rats are shocked in this, in these cages. There's actually electrified grids that are at the bottom of these cages that the experimenter can control. And what we want the rats to do is we want the rats to learn to come and respond and press a lever, and they can turn off the grid. So here I am turning on the grid. It sounds terrible, right? And the poor little rat is right, helpless, but then haphazardly hits something, and it turns it off. Okay, so then we do it again. We electrify the grid. What happens over time is that rat moves quickly and turns it off. Right? So essentially, that's just sort of an example of negative reinforcement. We want to withdraw something that's painful or aversive. Okay. Another example that's given is when you take ibuprofen. Okay, you have a headache, right? You take an ibuprofen, you're feeling good, right? It's going to be likely when you have a headache, you're going to go for that again, or whichever one works for you, right? Okay, that kind of thing. But that is reinforcing in the fact that it's taking something away, okay? So typically we think of more positive reinforcements, particularly in parenting situations, such as a treat. Now, non-reinforcement, basically, this is something that doesn't increase the likelihood of behavior occurring again. Okay? And so it's real important when we're working with parents, and all this is actually going to lead to what we're going to do with parents, but it's real important that you have an understanding of what would be reinforcing for that child and what isn't, because it's different for everybody. If you tell me, oh, after this we're all going to go watch a horror movie, it's like, count me out. Okay, where some of you would be like, yeah, I want to, great, forget it. But we're all going to go have candy in the other room. Sure, I'll be right over, right? So we're trying to get a handle on what would be for that particular child. There are some similarities, but you got to look at age differences with the child and things that they prefer. Now, the reason I want to mention non-reinforcement, because there are going to be times we want to be really clear on what's happening after the child emits a response. Because if it's a response that we want to get rid of, if it's not desirable, then that's exactly what we don't want any reinforcement. We want to make sure. And usually what we find is that, maybe unbeknownst to the parent or the provider, there is reinforcement taking place. Okay? And to give you an example, my son, at the time he was in kindergarten, they told me, he wouldn't want to participate with the kids. He just wants an adult at the table to talk to, or I said, okay, well, what happened? Well, we took him outside and we sat down with him and we talked to him. And then the next day, well, he really didn't want to do. Yeah, you guys get the picture? It's like, oh, okay, well, that explains a lot. But it's things like that. They want to talk to him about, hey, this is what you need to be doing. But at the same time, you got to be careful. You're actually putting in a reinforcement there that's increasing the likelihood of getting that, which, of course, that's exactly what happened. It's like, you know, you don't want to do that. You don't want to spend extra time with them and talk to them and separate them from the group and all of that. No, okay? So that's just an example, because oftentimes we're really not clear on this, and this is what we want a clear picture on, particularly when it's a behavior problem. Okay, so everybody kind of get the idea of reinforcement, and hopefully that's a bit of a review, positive and negative reinforcement. Okay. Another concept is contiguity, really has to do with timing. And again, these are principles of operant conditioning. And you can have a whole course and just schedules of reinforcement, which I know nobody here would ever probably want to take. But I do want to talk about timing, because that's one element of the schedules of reinforcement, because it's very important. Okay, and so typically if you're going to set up where you have a behavior and a consequence, you really want the timing of that consequence to be relatively immediate. Okay, so if Johnny is doing something that you really want him to do again and again and again, okay, so he is sitting down, he's playing nicely with his brother, okay, and you basically tell him about it the next day or praise them at another time, it's not as effective, okay, and we know that from Skinner's research as having it come right away, so it needs to be immediate, okay. And when the person is first learning any behavior, when we're first learning any behavior or skill, it needs to be continuous. So every time they emit that behavior, you give them a treat. Okay? And people that work with, particularly kids that are autistic, and we're going to talk about shaping, it's really important that it's continuous. Okay? Because you want them to get the connection. Over time, what we do, after the behavior is learned, we then change that so it's not continuous. Okay, and we put it on what's called an intermittent schedule, so they get it at different times, and it could be pretty much random here. There's one that's called a fixed and one that's called random. So we want to make sure that the behavior continues, and the word that's used in the field is extinguish. If it's a good behavior, we don't want this to happen. Okay, we don't want to, because we're now not giving him the treats anymore, that he's not going to do the behavior. We want him to continue to do it, so what we're doing now is we're going to space out when we give them those. Okay, so they don't know, it's unpredictable. And one of the best examples of this, and I don't know if I've told all of you this, but that the reason Vegas will never ever go out of business is because of this. Okay, because this is the type of schedule that they work on. Okay, it's an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. And so people know, I'm going to get paid. I know it's going to be this time. I just know it. It's going to, any time now. Okay? Right? Okay, so it's the same pattern. Alrighty, so that's a little bit about the timing. So again, that's important for parents to know, because if, you know, we're talking about behavior plans, one of the things we're looking at is how immediate is the reinforcement, that kind of thing. Or if they're taking something away, even if they opt to do that, which can be effective, you know, are they doing it right away? Is there a connection with the behavior? Because sometimes it's not related to the behavior if they do it at another time, on the weekend or something. Okay. Shaping is another term that came out of operant conditioning. And here, basically, this has to do when there's skills that we want someone to learn that are more complex, okay, and would require kind of more steps to learn it. So if you wanted to teach someone how to, I'm forgetting what it's called, in basketball, when you do the over the top, a layup, I think they call it, a layup. If they don't know how to bounce the ball, you know, you may want to start with, you know, dribbling the ball, right? And then work your way up to the layup. Okay, so it's anytime there's complex tasks that we want to break it down into small steps, and then we want them to learn it in a certain order. Okay, and shaping's, it's really done a lot. And definitely with autistic kids and special needs kids, sometimes we really have to break down a behavior into very small steps. Okay, and what that means is that the first step, if you have a child, you just want them to sit for 30 seconds without getting out of the chair. Okay, that may be the first step. And so if they're sitting there and it's 30 seconds, then they'll get rewarded. Okay, and whatever that reinforcement is decided upon. Okay, if they get to see a particular movie they like, or they get to play with a toy. But over time, what happens is that each successive step, it builds upon what's going to be happening later. So then you're going to have them do something else. Now they need to stay in the chair longer. Okay. Now they need to maybe pick up something if you want them to pick up something. With autistic kids, we want them to try to verbalize. So we may have them verbalize certain sounds. And then over time, we'll reward them for verbalizing actually, if they can get an entire word. So it's a process. And that's something that's used a lot. But again, it tends to be more types of behaviors where there's steps involved. So let's take a look. So most human behavior is believed to be attained through this process. So riding a bike, reading, writing, eating, playing games. The fact of the matter is that operant conditioning, and the word operant, the way it's considered in the field, is the person is operating on the environment. So they're actually doing something, and then it's either reinforced or it's not reinforced. But that person is voluntarily emitting some response. Okay, so the child is doing something, it's either reinforced by the parent or it's not. Okay, and this accounts for good adaptive behaviors, but it also accounts for maladaptive behaviors. Okay, so when we think of, and we're going to talk about Bandura here too, but there's a lot of behaviors that for the most part people would agree upon that they're not good behavior. They're very maladaptive. If you have a child who acts out aggressively when they're upset, that's a maladaptive behavior, and not being able to get along with others, and they're disrupting the class. So we have to look and see how has that been reinforced, and what can we do to unlearn it.